Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Wavy and this is just Wavy Media. And if you are a frequent surfer, you are most welcome back today as well. You're going to see from the title of this video that I'm doing something a little bit different today. The channel is kind of changing a little bit as my interests develop. So you know what, we've been Disney for a long time here. I've been doing a lot of Disney content, Disneyland content, Disney unboxings, that kind of stuff. That's not going to go away, but I want to kind of introduce more of the things that I'm interested in and looking into myself personally onto this channel. And so one of those things, one of my big interests at the minute is Irish mythology. And so what I want to kind of do with this series, which I think is going to be a series. I think there's going to be more than one video. They're not going to be weekly, it's just going to be every now and again. But what I want to kind of do with this series is not just tell you Irish mythological stories, although that will be part of it. But what I want to try and do kind of is to see how those ancient stories and mythologies have an effect on events or culture or whatever it is, have an effect on contemporary Ireland. So how the ancient stories affect modern times. And so some of these are going to be just connections that I see. Some of them are going to be, you know, kind of explaining a little bit of what we're like as Irish people because of, or through our mythology, and where some of the kind of idiosyncrasies that Irish people have or contemporary Ireland has come from. And some of them are just going to be a little bit totally off the wall. I might even make stuff up. Who knows? We'll see. So I'm going to tell you a bit of a mythological story, and then I'm going to connect it to something happening or something about Ireland in modern times. That's the kind of format we're going for with this series of Irish mythology. So not just the stories plus now. So I want to take us way back before Christianity came to this country, back before there was a group of people that became known as the Celts lived here. So we're going back to a time when what has become known as the Irish people now, or the Celtic people now, they did not live on this island. In fact, they lived in northern Spain in a region called Galicia that is still, or Galicia, I'm not sure if it's Thea or Cia, it's still there. You can go visit it, but there's a group of people there and they're called the Sons of Mill, and they're living there in northern Spain. And from a tower in northern Spain, Mill's father sees an island in the distance. And this is the story of Ireland before the Sons of Mill as well. Other stories which I might tell you also have a very similar beginning of how people came to Ireland. So they see Ireland from Spain and they sail off and they come to Ireland on the west coast. But there's a group of people living here when the Sons of Mill, the Celtic people as we know them now, when they arrive on the shores of Ireland, the west coast of Ireland, there's already a group of people living here, which in modern times is called the Tuatha De Danann. Or at that time, in ancient times in the Irish language, they were called the Fir Day. F-I, Fada. So Fada is like an accent that goes over a letter. It starts at the bottom left and goes up to the top right. So like when you're looking at it, it goes this way. And Fada just means long. So it makes your letter, your vowel sound longer. So F-I Fada, or fear, and then day, D-E Fada, making that E longer, day. And that means the god men, men of God. So it's men, God, god men. So they were called the Fear Day, the people that were on this island. And they were not just people. They had magical abilities, they had godlike character and qualities, a bit like the Greek gods, kind of. And they became, in the Celtic religion, they became the Celtic pantheon, the gods of the Celtic people who settled here. And so the Sons of Mill encounter these godmen, and what ends up kind of happening and we'll probably tell this story another time in more detail. They have battles, and eventually they decide that neither of them can best the other. There's some stories that say the Celts totally wiped out the Tuatha De Danann, but then they exist later in stories about the Celts. They come back, they're around, so probably not. Most likely story is neither of them can best the other, and so they make a pact with one another. And the sons of Mill, the Celts, they're clever, and so they decide they're going to just divide Ireland. They decide they're going to divide Ireland 50-50. And so they meet at Tara, the hill of Tara, which is the ancient seat of our high kings here in Ireland, which the Tuatha De Danann would have ruled at the time, and the sons of Mill would have taken over eventually. And so at Tara, they make this pact that they're going to divide Ireland in half. And the Tuatha De Danann ask, which half of Ireland do the sons of Mill, the Celtic people, which do they want? And they ask for the top. And so the Tuatha De Danann get the bottom. And so the Tuatha De Danann, the Fear Day, they move kind of underground into the other world. And modern people, we think of them as the fairy folk, the Fae. They're also called the Sai in Irish, S-I-D-H-E. So they are the fairy folk, the ones with power, the god men. And so time passes in Ireland. The sons of Mill begin ruling, and then a man comes, he's taken as a slave over to Ireland, and he escapes, but he comes back and he brings Christianity here. And so there's work going on to translate scripture, the Bible, into the Irish language. And when they're coming up with how to describe the chosen people, the people of Israel, in Irish, they use the term Fear Day, the old term that it would have been up until that point used for what we now call the Tuatha De Danann. And the Tuatha De Danann, that phrase, it means people of the goddess Danu. And early Irish history, so the early mythology, the stories of the people who are known as the Tuatha De Danann now, who were the Fear Day back then, they would have been recorded by Christian monks. So the Christian monks are given these mythological stories, and in these stories that they hear and they're now recording by writing down in their scriptoriums, they hear the Tuatha De Danann and they're called the Fear Day. But in their sacred scriptures, the Fear Day, those are the children of Israel, God's chosen people. There's no way they're going to call these pagan gods the chosen people of Israel's title in Irish. Not going to happen. So they change the name of the Fear Day and they change it to the Tuatha De Danann. And that means, Tuatha De Danann means like the tribe of the goddess Danu. And the weird thing about that is we have no existent Irish stories about a goddess called Danu. There's no stories in Irish about Danu. So either the monks didn't record any stories of Danu, or more likely, the monks tried to insult the ancient Irish traditions, the Celtic pantheon, because they obviously believed in the Christian God, in the one true God. They didn't want to elevate any of these other deities to that same status. So they kind of came up with a name that like insulted them in a sense, because there was no goddess Danu in the Irish pantheon as far as we can tell, because no stories of her have existed to today. No, none of them have been preserved. But we do know that there's a river in Europe called the Danube. The River Danube is the second longest river in Europe, and it's named after the Indo-European goddess Danu. So the monks seem to have taken a foreign goddess and made the Irish pantheon, the Irish Celtic pantheon, named it after her, which, you know, could be considered quite insulting. Like, imagine if you were a very important family, which like the Tuatha Dé Danann are kind of an important family. And I should probably call them the Fir Dé, because the Tuatha Dé Danann is that insulting name that they've been given. Just imagine that you're an important family and you're in a country, you're ruling that country, and then your stories later are handed down. But instead of being handed down with your name on them, with your family's name on them, they choose a family name from a totally different country and they give you that name. And you're remembered as that. Like a totally foreign name. I think that's just quite interesting. And obviously I've already mentioned that when the sons of Mill came to Ireland and they fought the Fir Dé, the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Tuatha, there's a story that says, you know, the battle was arranged, they were going to fight, they made this decision about the half-half, and the Tuatha Dé Danann took a step to the side. And when they took that step to the side, they disappeared into like the other world, the spirit realm, the land of the fairies. What is that sometimes called? The Seelie Court, those kind of ideas. They went into that place. It exists here, but it's not here. And so you have stories through Celtic times, before Christianity, and probably even into Christianity, of members of the Fir Dé coming back from that world and having an effect on our world. A famous one is Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn is the son of one of the Tuatha Dé Danann, one of the Fir Dé, but also one of the Celts. So his mother is a Celt, his father is one of the Tuatha Dé Danann. And so Cuchulainn, he exists in the time of the Celts. But he gets into a battle, he's badly wounded, he fights one of his best friends who's trained with him, but they're on different sides of this war, which is over a cow, another story for another time. And they fight. Cuchulainn is badly wounded, but he wins. And his father, who is of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and we're going to talk about him in a little minute, he comes back from the other world and he heals his son over 3 days. So even though there's stories that the Tuatha or the Fir Dé, that they were wiped out by the Celts, there's also stories of Celtic times of them as gods kind of coming back and having an effect in our world. So it stands to reason that there is a possibility that if they were able to do that in the 500s and 700s AD, that the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fir Dé are still able to do that today. And so you will hear stories about people, especially in Irish countrysides near places called ring forts, that they have seen like members of the Tuatha Dé Danann. Now we call them fairies, the fair folk, the good people, the little folk, leprechauns, you might know them as in the States. People see them, but they are coming out of that world, the Seelie Court, the other realm, which is kind of a Sabrina the Teenage Witch term, but that world where the fairies live, where they sidestepped into, and they're interacting with our world again. And so stories like that have continued up until today. So there are people who have seen members of the Tuatha, there are people who have seen fairies, who swear they've seen fairies, who've seen them playing sports matches out in fields in the middle of the night, in the middle of the countryside in Ireland. So there is this belief, this continued belief, that the Fir Dé, the Tuatha Dé Danann, are still around and still do interact with Ireland and Irish people and the Irish countryside specifically. So I want to tell you about what I think could have potentially been a little bit of revenge that the Tuatha Dé Danann, who were once called the Fir Dé, got on the new, more modern Fir Dé. Those who are called the Fir Dé in Irish now. And this happened in 2009. But before we do that, we need to talk about Cuchulainn's father. I said already that he is a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann. He is actually the king of the Fir Dé, the second king, I think. So he is actually born. He has a birth story. I'll tell you a bit of it. and he becomes king of the Fir Day later in his life. And this guy, his father's name is Cian. His father Cian has this magical cow. This magical cow, cows were very, very important in ancient Irish society. There's some people, we'll talk about this another time as well, there's a lot of links between ancient Irish mythology and language between here and with the belief system of Hinduism and the language of Sanskrit in India. So there's links between Sanskrit and Irish, the Irish language, and Irish religious customs and Hindu religious customs. And so the sacredness of the cow, we know that in modern times we associate that with India. So there's also an association there with ancient Ireland. The cow was considered very important. And so this Cian, who was a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, he has this special cow. And the cow basically is able to give milk all year long. That's kind of its thing. I'm sure it does more than that, but that's what I remember about it. Anyway, this cow is so special that Cian brings it everywhere he goes, kind of like you might your dog. It's like a member of the family. It's like his child. He brings it here, there, and yonder, all over Ireland with him. He brings him this cow. And at the time that Cian has this cow, there's a group of people that live kind of on the islands around Ireland. So Ireland is an island, and there's lots of little islands around Ireland. And so the people that live there, they're also kind of mythological, supernatural beings called the Fomorians. And so they're like sea creature gods. They're often depicted as like disgusting, but we don't really know. We don't have much descriptions of what they look like. We just know they have kind of power over the sea. They're kind of like the sea gods. So the Fomorians. And the Fomorians on the islands of Ireland, around Ireland, and the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fir Day on the island of Ireland, they are enemies with each other. And so one of the leaders, there's 7 kings. Ireland has a lot of sevens, so there's 7 kings of the Fomorians. These 7 kings, one of them is called Balor, or Balor of the Evil Eye. So Balor, he is very jealous of Cian's magic cow, and he wants to get this cow. And so what he does, this is a longer story than I'll tell you it this way, but he basically transforms himself into, I think it's a one-eyed ginger child who goes, so Cian has need of a new sword. So he's outside with his cow, outside a blacksmith's, and the blacksmith is perched on top of a hill, so he doesn't want to bring the cow the whole way up the hill. So he sends his armor bearer up the hill to fashion 2 swords. And the boy comes down from the hill and he says there's only enough metal up there to make 1 sword, and the other fella is taking it and he's leaving you with no sword. And so Cian says to the boy, here, hold my cow, I'm going to go up and get my sword. So he gives him the cow and he runs up the hill to get the sword, because he's not taking the cow up the hill, that's not happening. So he goes up the hill himself to get his sword. He's not letting the other fella take the sword. But he goes up and he sees 2 swords are being made, one for him, one for the other guy, and all is right with the world except for the cow. He's left the cow to some child, and clearly it was a trick because 2 swords are being made, not 1 sword. So he runs back down the hill and he sees that the cow is now gone, and so is the boy. There's no cow, no boy. He's distraught. He hires this person to help him figure out this druidess. So a druid, but a female druid, a druidess, who is going to help him figure out who it was. And it turns out to be Balor the Fomorian, Balor of the Evil Eye. Now Balor has been told that he can't be killed unless he's killed by his own grandson. So he has a daughter called Ethnu. Ethnu is taken to Tory Island, which is still there. You can still go to Tory Island today. And she's brought to a tower on the north point, built Rapunzel now. She's put up at the top of the tower, and she has 50 handmaidens guarding her, and they're not allowed to let a man near her because Balor is not taking any chances. He's not going to let her have a child so that he can't have a grandson, so that he can't be killed. So anyway, the witch, the druidess, she tells Cian it was Balor of the Evil Eye. He's the one that did it. Now, if you want to get Balor back, the only way that you can get Balor back is to give him a grandson. He's got this daughter locked up in this tower, so you need to go to her, you need to make her have a child, and then that child will eventually get your revenge on his own grandfather. And that's what's going to happen. So Cian goes off anyway, but no, you know, you're not allowed to go as a man, because these 50 women, they will not let you in. It's not going to happen. No men are allowed in. So you need to dress up as a woman. It's the first drag act in Irish history. You need to dress up as a woman, and you need to go with me, the Druidess, to this tower, and they'll let us in. And so the Druidess, she conjures this really crazy storm, and they go to Tory Island, and they get left in as shelter from the storm because it's okay, because it's 2 women. Now, in more recent Irish history, when Ireland was fighting for its independence, and I don't know if this story inspired it, but I believe it was De Valera was in prison, or Michael Collins was in prison. One of the revolutionary leaders of Ireland was in prison. The other one dressed up as a woman so that they could sneak a candle in to make an imprint of the key, to make a copy of the key, to get him out of prison. Possibly inspired by Cian's story, because Cian dressed up as a woman to trick Balor of the Evil Eye. So there's potentially a more contemporary story from Irish history affected by a mythological story from Irish history, but that's not the one I want to talk about. Let's keep going. So Cian dresses up as a woman, he goes with the Druidess, there's a big storm, they get in. The woman, the Druidess, she puts the 50 handmaidens to sleep. Now they are all at the bottom of the tower, they're not up with Ethnu, the daughter of Balor. She is by herself, so she doesn't get put to sleep. So Cian goes up to her, reveals himself to be a man. Ethnu has actually been having these dreams about Cian. She's seen his handsomeness in her dreams. She's longed for him. She doesn't know what a man is. She's never seen one before. She hasn't even met her father, I don't think. She doesn't know what a man is. So she sees Cian. She falls head over heels in love. And they do what people do when they're alone in a room and are in love. And so Cian leaves. He goes back to Ireland. He leaves Tory Island. And Ethnu gets pregnant. So 9 months later, she has her baby, and she actually has triplets. But Balor hears her screaming in her birth pains. And he comes along and he takes the kids and he throws them into the sea. Now, the Druidess that came with Cian, she's watching. So she turns 2 of the kids. Balor has created a whirlpool because he's a sea god, remember? He's created a whirlpool. But she turns 2 of the kids into seals, which become selkies. If you've seen Song of the Sea, you probably know what a selkie is. It's an animated movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's great. But that's what a selkie is. They're like seals that can turn into people, that can turn back into seals. And so that's what happens with these 2 kids. And then one of the other kids is carried away on a magical wave to Cian in Ireland, where he is found by his father and he's brought up, and he's called Lugh. Lugh, sometimes in Irish spelled Lu, Fada. Lugh is the guy who eventually becomes the king of the Fir Day, the Tuatha Dé Danann. He's the father of Cuchulainn. Lugh is known with many different titles. So obviously, king of the Tuatha Dé Danann is one of them, but he's also called on Sábháil Dánach or Sábháil Dánach, on Sábháil Dánach, which is the Irish word for, you know, when you see in a movie, there's a person, a character, Rey in Star Wars is one of them, that just seems to know how to do everything. He's kind of one of those, but it's actually like his god power, because if you think about who he is, right? He is the grandson of Balor, who is one of the Fomorians, one of the sea gods, right? So he is half sea god, and then he's also the son of one of the Fir Day. So he's half god, half sea god. So he's going to be special. So he's got this power which makes him the An Sábháil Dánach, which is the Sábháil Dánach, which means like able to learn and master everything really, really quickly, including poetry and art and skills and archery and the forging, creating swords, blacksmith, warriorship. Everything he's taught, he learns and masters very, very quickly. He's also called the Shining One, He's associated with the sun, like a sun god. He's also associated as being a storm god because he's got that sea power. And then he's also called Lugh Fada. La Fada being from Lugh Fada, which is long arm. So he had like a long arm of power when he was king. But Salvadonach is kind of the important one there, that he learns, everything he learns he masters. And so somebody like that is obviously going to really quickly rise through the ranks of his people and become, especially in a kind of a culture where the best is the one who's the strongest. He's able to master weapons use, creation of weapons, poetry. In ancient Ireland, there was this great kind of type of poetry which is kind of satire, and because people's reputations were so important, this satire could damage the reputation of important people. It was sometimes the only justice that you could get against powerful people in Ireland was to have a poet do a satire. He became a master of that too. So he was the master of everything. And he became the leader of the Tuatha De Danann. Now, we talked about the idea that it would be insulting to have your family be called the Fir Day, and then to be known now or remembered now by a foreign name, and how that might upset the person who would be considered the king or the leader of that group, who are now badly remembered or remembered incorrectly. This month, we are in the month of August as I'm making this video, which in Irish is Lunasa. Lunasa, Luna, often we associate in English with the moon, but that is what Lunasa in Irish is from Lugh. So it's Lugh's month. This is Lugh's month. And so we're talking about Lugh in his month. There's a festival in Ireland that happens on the 1st of August called Lunasa, which is where our month gets the name. It's spelled slightly differently, but the month gets its name from this festival. And that festival happens at the halfway point between the summer solstice on one end and the autumn equinox on the other end. So we're in Lunasa. We've just had Lunasa. Another thing that still carries Lugh's name is one of the counties of Ireland. County Louth in English, in Irish, is called An Lugh. L-U Fada. Lugh's county. So if you were to imagine a place where potentially the old Fir Day, now called the Tuatha De Danann, might get their revenge against the new Fir Day, the chosen people of Israel, where in Ireland do you think such an event might occur? And this is the interesting connection that I want to talk about and that I got thinking about as I was listening to Mythology about Lugh. So in Ireland, we have this big examination that happens at the end of our school years called the Leaving Certificate. So the Leaving Cert, it happens when you're about 17 or 18. It's a month-long exams. You do about 12 exams, 3 hours each. They test everything that you've learned in school, definitely over the past 2 years, probably over the past 14. And then, you know, it's based on the results of those that you get your college places, or sometimes jobs even. Yeah, you have to get certain results for jobs and stuff too. So the Leaving Cert is like that rite of passage to finish school and go into the adult world, as it were. In 2009, one of the strangest things happened with the Leaving Cert. I don't know if it's ever happened before, it hasn't happened since. One of my friends was doing the Leaving Cert in 2009 and he phoned me totally distraught. So the Leaving Cert always starts on a Wednesday, and it starts on Wednesday with English paper 1. And then there's usually another subject afterwards in the afternoon of Wednesday. And then English paper 2 is on Thursday. But in 2009, what happened? In County Louth, in Lugh's county, in 2009, on Wednesday, when English paper 1 was supposed to be given out, English paper 2 was given out to one school in Lugh's county. That might sound like not a big deal. Like, what does that have to do with Irish mythology? What does that have to do with the king of the Tuatha De Danann? I'll tell you. So, what that meant was English paper 2 on Thursday had to be cancelled for everybody across the whole country because a certain number of kids had seen it. 80 kids, let's say, had seen it. They were sharing on social media what was on it. So the State Examinations Commission were like, nope, we're not using that paper. We're going to create a different paper. We're going to print it and we're going to have it to all of the schools by Saturday. So Saturday became the day in 2009 for English paper 2. But who in Ireland would not religiously be allowed to sit an exam paper on a Saturday? That would be right. The modern version of the Fear Day. So across Ireland, Jewish kids or people who are part of Judaism in Ireland, whether ethnically or religiously, they were not going to be sitting that exam on the Saturday because that's the Sabbath. That's their day of rest. They don't do their exams on that day. So what had to happen to stop English paper 2 leaking to them who would be sitting it on Sunday, they had to have like a social media blackout, an internet blackout. They weren't allowed to watch the news. They weren't allowed to contact their friends who had sit the paper during the Saturday. They weren't allowed to talk to them so that they would not know what was on the exam when they went into it on Sunday. So you could say, and I'm not a believer in such thing as a coincidence, you could say that Lugh, the leader of the old Fear Day, who were insultingly renamed the Tuatha De Danann after a goddess that they know nothing about, who is not recorded in any Irish history, in 2009 got a sneaky little bit of revenge. Lugh has been known as a trickster in parts of Ireland, so that he plays jokes and practical jokes on people. So Lugh, in his county, Louth, County Lugh, on Lugh, he made sure that English paper 2 got given out to a certain school, which then meant that all of the people who in Irish are now called the Fear Day, all their children, had to be kept away from social media and their friends for an entire day so that they wouldn't know what was on English paper 2. And I call that Lugh's modern revenge for the insult of being remembered not as the Tuatha De Lugh, but as the Tuatha De Danann instead of the Fear Day. And that's my wild take on something that something that happened in Irish mythology and how it's had an effect on something that happened today. So he took revenge on the wrong people because it was the monks that did that to him. It wasn't the Jewish children. But he's a trickster, so you never know what the good folk are going to get up to. And I think that's Lugh's modern revenge. So I really hope you enjoyed that story, looking a little bit into how the birth of the king of the gods of Ireland occurred, or one of the kings of the gods of Ireland occurred, and maybe how potentially he got some revenge on an insult done to him hundreds of years ago, back there just a little bit more than 10 years ago. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like, subscribe to keep the tide coming in, click that notification bell so that you know the next time I post a video. And yeah, there'll hopefully be more mythology, Irish mythology, and how it's had some effects in modern Ireland stories for you in the future. Thank you for surfing on a channel that's just waving off for surfing, and I hope you have a magical day. Take care, guys, and I'll see you real soon.